Get out of here now! Go!
Let's get back to my car. Get back to my car.
What do you want from me?
Listen.
Madeleine Wade writes, directs, produces and stars in 2024's Vegan, a sort of grindhouse slasher movie. Let's discuss. So Madeleine plays a influencer called Carrie, who is a vegan, and by all accounts she very much lives her life for the camera. She is a lesbian, or at least that's how she's presenting, and she is obviously very into her kind of wellness and vegan lifestyle, and her brand is all about that sort of type of life. And she finds out that she's actually adopted, and she decides to make this a part of her channel or experience, and kind of use this as a way to try and get more viewers. So she kind of goes on this journey of sort of self-discovery to try and find out where she came from, what happened to her birth parents, etc. And this leads her to a rural farmhouse where she is abducted by a masked farmer who seems to want to tie her up and treat her like a cow. And, you know, ultimately, is she going to be a dairy cow used for milk and breeding, or is it going to be a cow that is consumed? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss. So I'm always a little bit nervous when you have a one-person kind of movie, because there's no one to push back on, you know, impulses. You know, when you have the same person starring, writing, directing, producing, you know, often I think these type of films end up becoming a little bit too insular to a degree. Let's discuss what this one's like. Now this, I have to say, has some interesting elements. It's a kind of partial found footage movie. Not every scene is found footage. I would say about 75%, you could argue, is sort of found footage. As she's an influencer, she's kind of wearing these like body cams a lot of the time, and even the killer is using a kind of an old 80s style VHS camera to record what he's doing. So we see footage from both, but it is interspliced with a few establishing shots, you know, certain angles which clearly aren't found footage, and then we have you know, footage of her, you know, her wife back home and things like this. There's also like a musical score, so it's not really a found footage film in its purest form, kind of like a hybrid version. So purists of found footage may not like, but I think her being an influencer, it does kind of lend itself to a degree at least. Now, what does legitimately work in this film? This movie, I think, if you're a fan of like the sort of 70s and 80s kind of exploitation films, this movie, I think, has some elements of that. It reminds you most probably of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We have this kind of masked killer who's using like a kind of a meat hook, and he's kind of has this kind of thing where he's videoing stuff in grainy VHS, and he's treating women like kind of cows and stuff, and very kind of cut off from modern society and stuff. So it definitely has that degree of kind of sleaziness and sort of grindhouse feel that I think might appeal to certain segments of the audience here. And even some of the way that it's filmed, very kind of like washed out colours at times, I think will kind of give you that kind of flavour. So if you are a fan of that sort of sleaze, exploitation style cinema, I wouldn't say the movie's all like that, but there is you know, a good portion of it which will kind of remind you of that. I also think the film has maybe not as much commentary as you'd expect, but at least some commentary on the sort of influencer types that permeate our internet these days, and the kind of like the things that they are doing in front of the camera, but you know, who might not necessarily exact or kind of reflect reality. For example, her marriage, she actually admits that she did that to serve her audience. It wasn't because she necessarily wanted to marry a woman because that's what she wanted. She thought it would suit her obviously left-leaning audience and things like this. And there's a few other instances where she's kind of, because the wife does a lot of the editing, she's sort of saying, well, you know, cut this bit out but show that bit because I want it to kind of reflect a certain way. So it's somewhat of a commentary on that sort of modern influencer type celebrities that we have these days and things like this, and how what you see is not necessarily reflective of the real person and things like that. It's a curated version of these type of people, which I found you know, quite interesting. And it has a sort of a sick and twisted kind of narrative to it to a degree, where this farmer is obviously sort of keeping women, and we sort of see video footage of previous victims where he's obviously keeping them like cattle, like animals and things like that, and that's how he views them, which makes for, you know, somewhat of an interesting kind of backstory and stuff, and obviously some deep-rooted problems, you might say there. It's never a particularly kind of gory film. In actual fact, it's quite a slow-paced movie, trying to more have almost a character piece to a degree. I don't think it's really successful in that, I have to say, but I feel that's the movie's intention at the very least. It's not a particularly long film, but I feel this movie, it spent a lot of time trying to establish these characters and their kind of status quo. So it does feel like a slower burn movie to a sort of certain degree. The movie's climax is also quite interesting in a large degree, because it actually is a little separate from the main bulk of the story. You almost have a secondary story. I won't say what happens, but the last kind of 10 minutes or so of the film is largely disconnected from the bulk of it. Almost a separate story, but involving the same characters. So that was an interesting idea here. And I quite like some of the technical elements here. Obviously, the different types of cameras have different qualities and things like that. So there's a little bit of attention to detail. Okay, so let's talk about what doesn't work in this movie's favour. So let's start out with some technical elements. The decision to have this kind of a hybrid found footage movie, I think, undercuts the impact that a fully formed found footage movie could have, because that raw gritty feel is lost because of this kind of hybrid feel. It almost feels like there's not many examples of these hybrid types, but there is a few, and I feel like these type of films want to have their cake and eat it too, but I feel it doesn't really serve, you know, the found footage camp, because you're missing that gritty raw feel, but also the traditionally styled filmed movies. Again, it might annoy people who don't like found footage. So I don't know if it was the best choice. I think it needed to commit one way or another, to be honest with you. Because it doesn't really make sense when we have so much sort of found footage style shots, and then other shots that are just feathered in there. So there's that. Now, in regards to the story, I don't know if it completely made sense. In a number of ways. Let me just give you a couple of examples. We learn her parentage and stuff, and and it's suggested that this killer has a certain, tie, shall we say? And think, well, that would make that person pretty old at this point. But they don't seem like that, and it's just like, I don't know if it completely makes sense, and there's things here, if you think too hard, I just think it's a little bit, it sort of comes apart at the seams a little bit. The story is slow. I mean, it is an abduction movie, and there's really, for the majority of this film, there is two characters on screen, and not a lot happens. It's not a particularly gory movie. I think some of the ideas here are relatively brutal, but I don't think it's a particularly explicit movie. And it's not like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in the fact that you kind of feel that it's explicit, even though it really isn't. It feels somewhat kind of, you know, we talk a lot about this sort of, oh yeah, there's all this stuff that's happened, but we never really feel like we sort of experience it. I have to say, I think the acting is a little on the weaker side, to be honest with you. And then towards the end of the movie, again, it just seems so disconnected. It seems like a set. I mean, it's kind of almost a surprise, because we have this sort of 10-minute epilogue where it really focuses on a different aspect of the movie. But then it kind of feels this is so apart from the bulk of the running time. It almost is its own separate film to a degree. It feels odd that that's the climax of the film. And then we have these sort of sequences where it's kind of fast forwarding and rewinding just in the last 10 minutes. And again, it doesn't really make sense when you're kind of watching it. And let's talk about the whole vegan thing. So I was expecting this movie to really have a bit of commentary or make that a central part of this film. It really isn't. I mean, she's just clearly a sort of liberal type person who is a vegan, you know, a lesbian at least for show, and does all this kind of stuff. But it really doesn't come into the movie all that much, to be honest. I mean, she is kind of, this farmer makes her kind of eat stuff which she wouldn't normally eat. But that's about it. I mean, it doesn't really factor in. It doesn't really feel like this is, the title of this movie is much to do with the actual kind of plot. It's just a kind of like a killer farmer movie, really, a slasher, if you like. So it feels like a missed opportunity, and though it does have a few sort of like little bits of commentary on, you know, reality TV or influencers and that kind of progressive lifestyle, but maybe not as much as you were thinking, not in the slightest. And again, I think the movie, having a title like Vegan, you would think it would lean more into a kind of a political angle, as that tends to be a kind of lifestyle choice, which tends to focus on a particular kind of like political leaning. And again, it just feels like it was not really taken advantage of to the fullest extent. Overall, I think this movie is a little dull. It doesn't really have a lot going on in regards to kind of plot. It has a few good ideas, and I kind of like some of the stylistic choices, but ultimately it's probably a little below average, to be honest. I'll give this one a 4 out of 10. Certainly, I think some people may enjoy aspects of this movie, but it's a little not fully formed, if you ask my opinion. But maybe some people would enjoy at least some of the aspects of this. 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to you next time. Bye for now.